The More Show is in partnership with Ozark Mountain Publishing, taking readers beyond the unexplained.
If you like what you watch, then don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates on The More Show. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new weekly television and radio shows.
The More Show is supported by Mindscape, Paranormal and UFO Matrix magazines, available for download on all major digital platforms. The comments and views expressed on The More Show are those of the people that make them and do not necessarily reflect the view of Kevin Moore, The More Show, or this radio station and its affiliate or sponsors. This show is for entertainment purposes only.
Welcome back. I'm now joined by Neil Slade via Skype from America. Neil is an author of 10 books on brain and behavior, including Tickle Your Amygdala. Neil studied and worked for 11 years at Colorado's Dormant Brain Research and Development Laboratory, established in 1957. Neil now joins me to teach you how to tickle your amygdala to turn on your best part of your brain. Good evening, Neil.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm very well. How are you?
It's a pleasure to be speaking with someone from one of my most favorite foreign countries, the UK.
Whereabouts are you based as well, Neil?
Well, I'm in the middle of America. I'm in Denver, Colorado, which is a little bit west of the land of Oz. East of the Rocky Mountains. Yeah.
Yes, that's right, the Rocky Mountains. Yeah, that's the one. Yes, because
it's right smack in the middle of the country.
Yeah, no, it's supposed to be very beautiful as well.
It is a very beautiful state. I'm lucky to live here. We're blessed by exceptionally incredible weather, which most people are jealous of once they visit.
Well, one of them being sat here in the studio right now speaking to yourself. So the brain, I mean, isn't it one of the most fascinating organs?
Well, certainly it's one that you can't do without. You know, you can replace pretty much everything in your body except for your brain. You can put in an artificial heart, you can change your limbs, you can change most of your internal organs, but the one thing you can't swap out is your brain. So it's probably the most important organ in your body as far as organs go.
Yeah.
And within
absolutely. Well, let's start from the top here because I keep pronouncing this word wrong, amygdala. Now, I'm quite dyslexic as well, okay? I passed the test pretty well.
Yes, you got it perfectly. Amygdala.
That's right.
Is
okay.
how it's pronounced. That's right. It's a very popular part of the brain these days. There's been a huge increase in research into the amygdala over the past 10 years. You go back 15 years, no one even had heard of that part of the brain. But suddenly it's very hip to be talking about the amygdala, and people are kind of throwing the word around quite a bit without knowing exactly what they're talking about. So I'm here to help clarify some of the misconceptions and myths about the amygdala. You actually have two of them. Did you know that?
I did not know. No, that's
yes.
Incredible.
Yeah, well, I brought my handy brain model here, Fred the brain, and I'll be able to point to and show you where the amygdalae are located in your brain and pretty much tell you, what it's for. So if you like, I can start.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, well, so here we have, and tell you what, I'll just tilt the camera down just for a moment here because I know you've got some things that you don't want to cover up. But here's my model of the human brain, and this is a life-size brain here, and it does, in fact, come off. And as you can see, it pretty much matches about the size that it would be inside my own head. And the wrinkly part of the brain here is what typically most people think about when they think of the human brain. But that's just the outside. And this wrinkly part really is only about 1/6 of an inch deep. And underneath that, you have another inch or so of white and gray matter. And if I flip it around, you can see a cross-section of the brain there. And right about here, in this part of the brain, there's a little button, and it's called the amygdala. And it's actually situated in between this is called the reptile brain. You see this white area here?
Yes.
Okay, that part of the brain controls very primitive and automatic reactive functions of the brain. You really don't, it runs by itself. It's all automatic, right? And the reptile brain pretty much controls things like heart rate, body temperature, automatic reactions like fight or flight. You know, you've heard that term? When
Yes.
we click fight or flight, you don't think about it. If you see a snarling wolf coming down the street at you, your reptile brain clicks in and you just hightail it in the other direction, or you grab a big stick and fight. And it just reacts. You don't think about it. And then you've got another area here which kind of surrounds the top part of this reptile brain, and this is called the mammal brain. It's called what's called the mammal part of the human brain, and it adds on some basic functions such as basic social interactions, emotions, nurturing. Okay, and so that's what this part adds on emotions. But all of this stuff here, this is what's called the primate brain. This little bit here has to do with some motor coordinations. It's the cerebellum, and it's also nicknamed the little brain. All right, but you've got all of this big area here, which is called the primate brain, and it's really fine developments, further developments of what these more primitive parts of the brain can do. And it's what makes us very uniquely human. And the first half.
Radio Cardiff on air. 98.
What was, what
Sorry
was
about that. No, carry on. Sorry about that.
That was I don't know what that was. That was the little brain speaking to us all right there, it sounded like. So this whole front of the brain and everything that's in front of this red primary motor strip here, which controls motor movement in the brain. This whole big section of the brain is called the frontal lobes, and it's the most advanced part of our brain. It's a very important part of our brain. We calculate imagination, abstract thinking, concepts of time, and very importantly, empathy. It allows us to imagine what it would be like to be in someone else's shoes. That's all in this whole front half of the brain here, called the frontal lobes. Now, back to the amygdala. So the amygdala is, you can't really see it. It's kind of hidden. It's this little button down here. The amygdala is kind of situated halfway between this most advanced part of the brain and the most primitive part of the brain. And what the amygdala does is it's like a master compass. So it tells us through emotions whether we're using this advanced part of our brain or whether we're clicked back into this reactive automatic reptile brain. So the amygdala is really a master compass in our brain to let us know whether we're moving whether we're processing thinking and behaviors that enhances our survivability, or whether we are just clicked back into this reptile brain where we feel threatened by the environment and are clicked into fight or flight. So that's basically what the amygdala is. It's an emotional compass within our brain.
Right, okay. I mean, do we understand most of the brain? I mean, how far has science come on? And what is there still to discover about the brain?
Well, I like to say that the brain is an infinity machine. We'll never know everything about the brain because the brain is unlimited in its capacity. There is no limit. There are no natural limitations as what the brain is capable of. And every neuroscientist would agree with you in that respect. There's a kind of a folk saying that we only use 10% of our brain. And although that's not literally true, because we use all the different parts of our brain to one extent or another, we don't know how much how much we can do with our brain. So it really is an infinity machine. So we'll never know everything about the brain, but we are learning more and more as time goes on. And these days we have a lot of very advanced technologies which help us to kind of look at the brain in ways that we haven't been able to before, and that's very helpful.
Okay, so how can we sort of turn on the more potential part of the brain as well?
Right. Well, of course. That's the primary question, and so for that's one thing that this little model helps us to understand. And I'm going to take this front part of the brain, and as you can see, I've got this color coded. Do you see how I've colored in the reptile? Is that close enough?
Oh,
Can you
that's
see
perfect.
that?
Yeah, we can see that on the Ustream. So anyone listening in right now to the radio, basically we've got a model demonstration here of the brain sliced in two with different colors, and this will be a video that will be available to watch as well later on. I mean, so please go ahead. Thank you.
Sure. So I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible so people understand how they can turn on more of their brain potential. So what I've done is I've color-coded the reptile brain, this center section here, kind of like the seeds of an apple. You know how the seeds are this hard part of an apple in the middle, and it allows the tree to reproduce, right? But it's not very tasty. It's kind of, your reptile brain is sort of the same way. The neurologist's joke is that the reptile brain computes the 4 F's of human behavior: feeding, fighting, fleeing, and reproduction. Okay? So those are the 4 F's of human behavior, right? Computed right here. That was a joke. So this is, I didn't get my letters wrong. All right? So that's the reptile brain. Now here's the thing. You know, the reptile brain is connected to the amygdala a little further forward. And so whenever we click into pure reptile brain behavior, we get a red warning. We get what's negative emotional feedback. Whenever you feel threatened, you feel bad, okay? Whenever you feel like you have to fight or flight, you get negative emotion. And it's like a red warning light. Julia, would you get Urfi and Chloe? My dogs are accompanying me in the other room.
They've come to say hello. It's okay.
All right. So when you have just this reptile brain, and it's a very small portion of the brain. I mean, volume-wise, it doesn't make up even maybe 5% of the brain. So if you're clicked into this reptile brain, you hear them. They're clicked.
They want to come on the camera.
That's right. When you're clicked into this small portion of your brain where all intellect is turned off,
Yes.
when your imagination is turned off, when your social behaviors are turned off, you get that negative emotional feedback. So when you feel bad emotionally, that's your brain telling you, hey, buddy, you're only computing with your reptile brain. All right? You get the red warning light. Now, on the other hand, the frontal lobes, this whole big section in the front here, that's where you compute compassion, where you compute imagination, concepts of time, abstract thinking. You know, when Einstein was developing his theory of relativity 100 years before anyone even really knew what he was talking about, he was computing that in this very advanced part of his brain. And since this is also connected to the amygdala, what the brain does is it gives you positive reinforcement. You get feel-good emotions. And so this is symbolized here by the blue light. You feel good, right? So your emotions are your brain's way of telling you, if you're using just a tiny part of your brain with the negative emotions, or if you're using all of that unlimited potential with your frontal lobes. It's a very handy way of your brain encouraging advanced thought through positive emotions and discouraging non-thinking reaction with negative emotions. It's a very simple and foolproof system, and it's hardwired into every person's brain that way, whether you know it, whether you believe it, whether you know any neurology or not. That's how the human brain is wired up. Negative emotions is connected to tiny bit of your brain reaction. Positive emotions are encouraged and connected to all of this big frontal lobe's potential. So that's our brain.
I mean, thank you for that wonderful demonstration. And I'm just been watching you on the camera here, and you've got a great video connection, so it makes it so much easier just to see your demonstrations. So, well, where does consciousness come from then? I mean, where's your work taking you into that field?
Well, consciousness, that's a pretty tricky question. I don't think anyone has really figured that out precisely.
Well, what's your opinion on it then?
Well, my opinion is this, in this lifetime, we've all got one of these. And whether or not, I think consciousness is filtered through the brain as we live our human existence. Now, of course, there have been a number, I mean, probably hundreds, if not thousands of studies that have shown that we do have consciousness even at times of death. For example, out-of-body experiences where a person is conscious of surroundings of a completely foreign nature. I'll give an example of that. It's a personal example. My wife is from China.
Right.
And she's had a number of very interesting out-of-body experiences. One in particular comes into mind while she was attending law school. She's not one of these flaky hocus-pocus kind of known, she's got her feet planted firmly on the ground. And while she was at law school many years ago, she went to bed to take a nap in the middle of the afternoon. And suddenly she found herself flying through the air and landing at the train station of her hometown in China. And she looked around and she noticed the clock at the train station, and it said 2 o'clock. And she knew since it was dark, it must have been 2 a.m. And that made perfect sense because she was in bed in Missouri at noon.
Yes.
So she did the calculations, and that would have been 2 a.m., exactly what the clock said in her hometown in China. And then she looked around and she saw two buildings that were brand new, and all the lights were turned out. So to make a long story short, she called her sister the next day and she described the two buildings that she had seen. And her sister said, "Well, how did you know? They just built those buildings." And she said, "Well, I read about it." She was kind of lying to her sister because she didn't want her sister to think she was nuts. And as it turns out, they didn't. It was a hotel that they had recently built that Julie had no knowledge of whatsoever, but they hadn't opened, so the building didn't have any of its lights on. And when she observed these two new buildings, which she also described perfectly according to their height, 20 and 22 stories, she observed that there wasn't any lights on in the building, and that, of course, was because the hotel had never opened up. So that's kind of a personal account of how her consciousness had gone 10,000 miles, right? And, of course, we're all familiar with the stories of people who are clinically dead.
Neil, we've just got to take a quick break here. I want to get into this after the break because this is so interesting, and especially with your work. So, okay, we're going to take a short break now. After the break, the phone lines will be open for you to speak to Neil Slade or share your opinion. You can call us on 0292 000 3666 or text your comments and questions to 07728 758 759. Now remember, international listeners outside the UK may Skype the show by adding the More Show live, or you may choose to interact with us on Facebook and Twitter.
The More Show is in partnership with Ozark Mountain Publishing, taking readers beyond the unexplained.
Visit themoreshow.co.uk/shop to purchase products and services from your favourite past guests. If you're new to this site, you can also catch up on the previous television and radio shows through YouTube and the More Show website.
The More Show is supported by Mindscape, Paranormal and UFO Matrix magazines, available for download on all major digital platforms. Broadcasting from the studios of Radio Cardiff, you're now watching The More Show.
Welcome back. I'm still joined by Neil Slade, an author on brain and behaviour via Skype from America. Neil, welcome back to the show.
Nice to be back.
So just before the ad break there, Neil, we were discussing your wife's out-of-body experience.
Right, and it's something that a lot of people have experienced. That was just a personal example there. Mm-hmm. But you were asking really about consciousness.
Yes. And yeah, I mean, obviously that's where the question was leading to. She's had that experience, and what did it mean to her? I mean, as your partner, I mean, what did you...
She began looking for answers, and she wanted to know what that was about. And so I think a lot of people have that same basic question: where is consciousness, or even more basically, who am I? And although we do know that consciousness can exist outside of the human brain, most of the time we're experiencing reality through this filter system. And what is revealing is if you know how the human brain works, if you know what the frontal lobes do, if you know some basics about the brain, you're going to be able to drive your life more where you want to go, as opposed to just aimlessly ending up here and ending up there. Kind of like a car, our brain and our body is the vehicle through which we experience life. And if you don't know what the brake pedal is for, if you don't know where the gas goes, if you don't know how to shift the gears, you're going to have a hard time getting from point A to point B in a car, right? So in our human body, this is our vehicle. The brain is a very important component to our earthly experience. So all I'm suggesting is learn a little bit about the vehicle. Learn what this part of the brain does and learn what this part, and a few brain basics, and then you'll be able to drive your brainmobile pretty much wherever you want to go instead of randomly ending up places that you don't even know how you got there. It's very simple. This is your motor. Learn how the motor works.
Right. Okay. Sure. No, and that is good advice as well, and it's interesting stuff, I've got to say. But in your opinion, are you more than your body?
Yes, in my personal opinion, you have a lot of experiences that are that you don't really have an explanation for. A lot of the paranormal types of experiences that we talk about, such as telepathy and precognition, we're sometimes at a loss as to where they come from and what that's about. But interestingly enough, if you understand how the brain is put together, it will also tell you how to access these paranormal types of abilities and functions. Because each one of the paranormal and perhaps out of body experiences, such as telepathy or clairvoyance or clairaudiences, they all relate to specific functions within the human brain. And if you want to tap into more of that kind of thing, then it's very helpful to know exactly what these frontal lobes are all about and what the amygdala is all about.
Okay. So, okay then, well, with things like intuition then, why is our intuition sort of always right? And which part of the brain is that connected to as well?
Well, I don't think our intuition is always right. And I think anyone who has really examined their experiences will realize that sometimes you'll have a feeling and you'll be right, but other times you'll have a gut feeling about something and you're dead wrong. That's been my experience, and that's been my observations with a lot of people. And the real discerning point about whether to trust your intuitions or whether you're going to be accurate with your intuitions or not has to do with whether or not you are processing information with the me part of your brain, or if you're looking at the bigger picture. And if we go back to this model of the human brain again, and we look at the relative sizes of the brain, this reptile brain computes what we call competitive consciousness. It computes the dog-eat-dog part of awareness. When you're just thinking about me, you're just using this little part of the brain here. Now, things like accurate telepathy, things like accurate precognition depend on this frontal lobes portion of the brain. And specifically, there's a section on the inside of the fold, and I'm holding it sideways.
Yes.
Right inside, you've got a right hemisphere and a left hemisphere that I'll show right here. Well, you've got this little fissure right in between. And right in the front, on the inside of that fissure, you've got a portion of the brain called the premedial cortex. And that computes things like empathy, and again, how it feels to be in another person's shoes. Now, when this part of the brain is on, you're going to have a much more accurate perception of another person's thoughts or another person's feelings, as we talk about in telepathic communications. If you can't understand what it's like to feel in another person's perspective, this part of the brain is off. So very often people will say, well, I'm using my gut intuition, and so I think this is the right way to go. But if they're only computing with this reptilian portion of the brain, the intuition is going to be dead wrong. And I'm sure we've all kind of experienced that. A lot of people would like to think, well, you know what? I'm going to predict the winning lotto numbers. Here in the U.S., we've got lotto. It's called lotto.
Oh, that's right. Yes, yes.
Super Bowl, right? And so you would think that, well, if precognition is so readily available to everyone, why don't we hear about people that are picking the winning lotto numbers? We never hear about that. Isn't that funny? For all of the people who claim to be psychics and telepathic and can go into the future and do remote viewing, I cannot recall a single lotto or Powerball winner ever saying, oh, well, I had a premonition or an intuition. And the reason is simple. If you're thinking about money, if you're thinking about self-gain, baby, all you're doing is using your reptile brain. By contrast, I have a very interesting story of some people who worked in a nonprofit organization, and they lived just near Las Vegas.
Right.
And they were dependent upon donations to keep their nonprofit going. And as it turned out, whenever they needed money, they just decided, well, you know what? We've run out of funds. We need some money for our nonprofit organization. They would then take a trip into Las Vegas, and they'd come back with a bag full of money. And it was because they weren't thinking about themselves. They were thinking about helping others. And that's a very key component to real paranormal perception when it occurs inside the human brain.
So you think when you're doing something that's for the benefit of others, and when you're working on behalf of the benefit of others, even though it's for your joy and experience as well at the same time, then you can access different parts of your brain that will help you to achieve what it is you've set out to achieve.
That's exactly right. Earlier I was talking about the positive emotion versus the negative emotion of the human brain. That when you feel bad, you've got your reptile brain clicked on, and when you feel good, you've got your frontal lobes. And I need to clarify that just a little bit, because your reptile brain, since it also computes reproduction and basic needs like fulfilling hunger and feeling a relative safety, you can experience some limited pleasure and pleasurable emotions through the reptile brain, but only for a very short period of time, because the reptile brain can't compute, it can't calculate anything that goes beyond the moment. So if you want to experience long-term and sustained pleasure, you have to utilize that frontal lobes, because only the frontal lobes can figure out cause and effect. That it can calculate the effects of what you will do today, how that will work itself out along the timeline. The reptile brain is only moment to moment. It's only going to be concerned with what's going to make me feel good right now. Okay, the reptile brain can figure that out, but it can't figure out the consequences of your actions tomorrow, or a week from now, or a year from now. If you want sustained long-term pleasure, you got to use this advanced part of your brain towards the frontal lobes. And when you do, that's when you get that long-term pleasure happening, and the pleasure that doesn't have a reality hangover later on. You can drink a gallon of beer and feel really good this afternoon or tonight, but how are you going to feel tomorrow? So if you want that sustained feel-good feeling, you got to tickle your amygdala forward and turn on its frontal lobe.
Absolutely. But
you have to make that distinction. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
no.
Distinction.
That is an important distinction. But I remember a particular guest, I won't name names, but saying to me, look, Kevin, your brain, if you go with your brain, it will never give you happiness, but your heart will. Can you go down that direction, or?
Well, the thing is, people, if you don't understand your brain, you're going to differentiate between your heart and your brain. Emotions, whether they be negative or positive, they're computed here in your brain. You can put an artificial heart in someone, okay? And that person will continue to live. You can take the heart out of a baboon and put it in a human being, as they did when they were first experimenting with heart transplants. And there are certain memories and there are certain emotions that are connected to different parts of our body. For example, what's called the enteric nervous system. You have a bundle of neurons in your abdomen that number in the hundreds of millions, as many in your abdomen that are inside your cranium, okay? So you've got nerves and you've got cells, and all of your cells have memory and they have emotions, but the true emotional content, when you do something that makes you feel good,
Yes.
that's happening in here. So when people talk about follow your heart, they're really talking about listening to the part of your brain that computes empathy, that computes that ideal of the moral compass. The moral compass happens inside your brain, irregardless of what symbolic or historical meaning we may have given to other parts of the body. So I'm not discounting that idea of follow your heart, for example. I'm just saying know that those feelings of compassion, feelings of right and wrong, it's in your brain. That's where that's really happening. That's the function of the brain. Very interestingly, if you sever the frontal lobes from the rest of the brain, there's a very famous case, Phineas Gage. Are you familiar with that name?
No, but please go ahead.
Phineas Gage was a railroad worker in the 1800s in the West as they were building the railroads. And his job was to tamp down the explosives, the dynamite, that would clear the rock and rubble and that would allow them to build the railroad lines. And one day he has a big spike, and it's about this. I can't show you. It's wider than the screen. He's got a big long iron rod that he would tamp the dynamite into the ground, and then they would set it off. Well, one day he tamped it, and the dynamite went off. And what it did is it forced this big 1-inch rod in through the bottom of his eye orbit and out through the top of his head.
Oh gosh!
And what it did is it severed the frontal lobes from the rest of his brain. He got an instant frontal lobotomy, and so he no longer had the use of his frontal lobes. And what happened was he lost that ability to feel empathy and feel compassion for anyone else. So when we're talking about use your heart, he lost his heart, but it wasn't because the iron bar went through his heart. It's because it severed his frontal lobes from the rest of his brain. And that's how he lost those types of functions in his own life. So,
well, I mean,
proof that. Yes, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I mean, what stops, murderers and rapists, committing these horrible acts? I mean, within me, I know I wouldn't want to knowingly hurt anyone, but these people just don't have that same empathy.
That's exactly right. And these people can't follow their heart, right? Well, it's not because they've got a defective heart. It's because they've got a defective brain. Now, there have been a couple studies that I know of. One was done on two groups of prison inmates. One group was prison inmates who were deemed psychotic. They had no remorse for their crimes. They had no feeling that they did something wrong. So that was one group of prisoners, and they had brain scans. Then there was another group of prisoners who had also been convicted of very serious crimes, but they felt remorse. They felt like, yeah, I did something wrong and I'm sorry for it. So what happened? They did brain scans of both these groups of criminals. The difference between the criminals who admitted that they had done something wrong and those psychopathic criminals, the psychopathic criminals had no activity in the premedial cortex. It was either damaged or they just were lacking function, whereas the other criminals had perfectly functioning frontal lobes. And so your question, how can people do something horrible like that? It's a matter of brain function. Okay. If you're missing that part of your brain working right, you don't care what you do to other people, and you can't follow your heart, as it were.
Okay. Well, we're going to take a short break now. The phone lines are open for you to speak to Neil Slade or share your opinion. Remember, you can call us on 0292 000 3666 or text your comments and questions to 07728 758 759. And remember, international listeners outside the UK may Skype the show by adding The More Show Live, or you may choose to interact with us on Facebook and Twitter.
The More Show is in partnership with Ozark Mountain Publishing, taking readers beyond the unexplained.
If you like what you watch, then don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates on The More Show. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new weekly television and radio shows.
The More Show is supported by Mindscape, Paranormal and UFO Matrix magazines, available for download on all major digital platforms. Broadcasting from the studios of Radio Cardiff, you're now watching The More Show.
Welcome back to the show. I'm still joined by Neil Slade. Neil, welcome back. Neil, can you hear me?
Hold on, there we go. I loosed my cord. You okay now?
That's a lot better. Thank you so much. No, seriously, thank you for joining us because, this has been a really interesting and fascinating interview about the brain. I don't think we give it enough, enough sort of justification, do we, sometimes, of how much, do you know, the funny thing was, right, well, not a funny thing, but, I was doing a show once on brain damage. And I thought about this show, obviously, when this previous show, when doing today's show, and you've only got to have a slight bang to the head, and you can really damage yourself. You've got to be so careful with the brain, haven't you?
Yeah, well, the brain's very interesting because depending on how and where you hit it, you can either a little bit of damage can do a lot, or sometimes there's an operation called radical hemispherectomy where they actually remove fully one half of the cortex. Absolutely. It's used in very severe cases of epilepsy, and mostly done with children because they have a lot of plasticity and they have a much better recovery from such an operation. But indeed, in some cases, that's the only way to control the epilepsy. They take away half the brain, and the child will fully recover all of the functions as if they had a full brain inside their head. And the remaining half will take over all of the missing functions from the half that's been removed. So it's hard to generalize about what kind of damage. You never know until you know.
No, that's right. And like I say, this guy only, he hit his head quite severely on the ground, but, you wouldn't have, he never expected to have these not paralyzed, but he never expected the issues that he did, that he got from, from only having a bump as such. So,
it's interesting because that reminds me of some research I did last month on paranormal brain activity. And there's a number of cases, and there's been a fair amount of research that shows that some types of brain injuries can lead to an increase in unexplainable and, in fact, paranormal types of brain function. One fellow was in a bicycle accident, and suddenly he found that he could play piano and became an expert keyboard player and learned almost instantaneously how to play piano and began to compose music. And this all was the result of a brain injury. There are a number of types of stories, real stories like that. So sometimes even there can be positive results to what we might think would be a traumatic.
And that's just how much we understand about the brain. Like you said before, it's an ongoing, and maybe we'll never understand the full workings of the brain, but who knows? Okay, we've got a caller on the line. Joanna, are you there?
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Hello. Yeah,
Hi, Joanna.
I would just like to say that I really enjoyed the interview. I was wondering about, paranormal experiences. So, for example, someone say that they see ghosts or they see spirits. How do you know it's actually a real experience or it's just an imagination? Which part of the brain that it's working when, things like that happens?
It's a very interesting question. Well, of course, unless you have some sort of physical evidence, you don't know if someone is imagining it. Um, Again, I'll reflect on a little personal experience here. When my wife uh, moved from another state to live with me, we had a broom that began to fly off the wall. And the first time it happened 3 times in one week, and we were in bed sleeping, and we heard a loud bang, bang, that we just bolted up in bed, only to find that we had a decorative broom. It looked like a broom from the Harry Potter book. Someone had made just an art piece of art and painted it, so it was decorative. It wasn't one that we cleaned our floors with. This broom started launching itself off of the wall, and it flew by itself from a very rigid hook into the middle of the living room. And it's done it 5 or 6 times, twice when we were in the room when it happened. So when you've got some sort of physical evidence that can reinforce your own personal feelings or whatever, then you know that it's just not in your imagination or not.
Okay, so
And again, something like the out-of-body experiences. I think of a case where a woman had died on the operating table and then was revived. And while she was dead, she reported seeing a red sneaker on the roof of the hospital, something that she would have absolutely no way of knowing. And so to test whether or not she was just imagining that or if it was real, they sent a couple of witnesses up to the roof, and sure enough, there was the red sneaker. So, you can always test the hypothesis and find out if it's just a matter of you're imagining something or if there's some really physical evidence to back up your observation.
But then, what was your opinion then of this broom that was traveling across the room? I mean,
Well, we thought about that for a while, and it dawned on us about an hour later that a woman had committed suicide in this apartment building where we live, about 5 years prior to me moving in, or a couple years prior to moving in. And I was completely unaware of this until a neighbor mentioned it to me years and years later. And so my wife immediately made peace with the spirit that she felt that she was talking to, and the broom started flying off the window, off the wall.
Yeah. So
that was until another old girlfriend came into the apartment building, and then it flew off the wall again. So we think the woman who had died was still in the apartment, and she was jealous of my wife and then of my old girlfriend who came to visit us one day. So anyway.
Well, Joanna, thank you very much for your call.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Well, that's that's what I like about yourself. I've got to say, Neil, not only are you great at coming across with this information, but you're very open-minded, and you don't find that in many people in your field.
Well, I am a very reluctant to depend upon experts in any field. I think we're all very good judges of what's real and what's not real out there. And I've heard some just really outlandish statements made by professionals in the field of brain research. And I think as a normal person really needs to weigh everything that someone says and to consider and check the resources and check again, and don't really believe someone just because they've got a piece of paper hanging up on the wall or that they have a big title. Do your own research, check into things. If I say that the amygdala does something, well, you know what? You should go online and make sure that Neil Slade is just not full of baloney and making all this stuff up. And, check out my resources and so on, and come into whatever field it is that you're investigating with with a bit of your own homework being done.
I bet you're an interesting teacher. I bet you're an interesting lecturer, shall I say?
I taught music for 30 years, and I taught music to kids in elementary and high school, and I found that they don't necessarily believe anything. So you've got to really have some very credible argument, and you've got to have some credible research to back up what you say.
Well, how does music affect the brain then?
Oh, music is very interesting. I recently saw a very, interesting Nova is a television program here in the United States. And they did a brain scan of a fellow named Oliver Sacks, who is also a researcher. And what they found was that his amygdala, when he listened to music that he enjoyed, such as Bach, it turned on his amygdala and it turned on his frontal lobes. And when he was listening to music he didn't like, that didn't happen. So it was a real verification of the idea that the amygdala is in fact a compass that lets you know through your emotions when you're using your advanced frontal lobes. And there it is in the black and white of the brain scan. So it showed that music was tickling his amygdala, as it were. And there have been quite a number of research experiments to show that there is this interplay between the amygdala and the frontal lobes.
Now, we've got a text in from an anonymous. Please send your names in when you send a text in. But it's covering all ground. But I thought, well, it's still worth the question. Your thoughts on psychokinesis? Is it real?
Oh, absolutely. And we've tested it a number of times around here. I don't like to spend too much time on what I consider tricks of paranormal experience.
Yeah.
I have a term called SESP, and we all know what ESP is, extrasensory perception. I've coined a term SESP, which stands for spontaneous extrasensory perception. And the idea is this: your paranormal senses, and there are 5 of them, just like there are 5 normal senses, are 5 normal senses being, you can remember them from your head: sight, smell, taste, hearing, and of course touch. Okay, so those are your 5 normal senses. But you have 5 paranormal senses as well. Hopefully I can remember them. You would have telepathy, which is knowing what another person is thinking or feeling. You have you have precognition, which is knowing what is going to happen in the future. You have clairaudience, which is hearing something that there's no audible source of, hearing something without there being any physical source of that sound. You have clairvoyance, which is seeing something for which there is no sensory input. And then you have the 5th one, which is what you're talking about, psychokinesis.
Yeah.
Objects moving without being physically manipulated,
Yes.
right? As it turns out, each one of those paranormal senses has a corresponding area in the brain, in the frontal lobes. So if you want to turn on those 5 paranormal senses, just make sure your frontal lobes are active, okay? So that's one thing. Now, in terms of psychokinesis being real, well, we know that because we've built little mind motors where, for example, you can make a very simple device by placing a square of tinfoil on a needle and balancing it, and then attempting to move that just with sheer thought. And you place that under a glass dome so you know that you're not moving it with your breath. And we've had some success around just testing that informally around here. But another famous one that we did on Art Bell's show many years ago, about 1997. And at that time, there were raging forest fires in the northeastern corner of Florida. And there was no rain predicted, and everyone was, just kind of going crazy because it was devastating the state. So it turned out I did that radio show, and I knew there were about 1 million or so people listening to the radio show. And I said, well, listen, everyone, why don't we all tickle our amygdala and collectively let's imagine rain falling on this particular region in northeastern Florida. And we actually were monitoring it with satellite images.
I remember that show,
We started doing it, and within an hour we could see cloud formations. And I said on the show, I said, this will probably take about 3 days because it's a big idea. And, I've never done this before. For me, it was absolutely a cold experiment. I said, I don't know if this will work, but if it does, it'll probably take a couple days. In 3 days, it started pouring rain, and it didn't stop until they got between 8 and 10 inches. And the weather records reflect this. And you can go to my website, and you can see the satellite maps, and you can see the weather records. And sure enough, people, for all I can see, made it rain when there was no rain predicted and where it was really needed. And again, it was another example of not doing something for me, but doing something for the collective good. And it was just that combination of people being open-minded and focusing their brain focus energy. And we made it rain, and sure enough, that was the end of the fires.
Well, I'll back you up there. I mean, it's amazing what you can do when it's for the benefit of others and yourself. I've got to place yourself in there as well. But when it's got that benefit of others in the recipe, wow, it just takes off.
Well, you always win. Whenever you think of someone else rather than just yourself, you always win. You always come out on top.
Okay. And, I'll just say, I do remember that Art Bell show because I think it was a classic, one of his classics, I think.
Yes, they eat it frequently.
Yeah. I mean, he was a great host.
The problem is when you start playing games, when you start trying to prove that you have got brain power, that, I can move this pencil with my mind across the desk, or I can win a lotto ticket. Listen, it shuts off. It's something about your brain knows when you're being selfish.
Yes.
Your brain, something knows when you're just trying to prove that you've got power. The yogis from thousands of years ago have a saying, and they call these powers of the brain cities. And they say, when you get the power, don't use it because it's Maya, it's illusion. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. The other thing, however, is though, there are these powers of the brain that do exist. These paranormal abilities do exist. The thing is, they'll happen when they need to happen. If you're using your brain the right way, if you're tickled in your frontal lobes and you feel compassion and empathy and you think about the greater good and you think about doing something and you understand the consequences down the timeline, when your own normal senses aren't enough, you'll find that the SESP, it turns on when you need it, and you don't even have to worry about it. That telepathy, it'll turn on. You'll know what somebody else is thinking. You'll get that remote viewing happening. You'll know, you know what, I shouldn't go down the street. I should take another route. That stuff will automatically happen without even trying, as long as you keep that amygdala tickled forward and you're using those advanced frontal lobes.
Okay. Now let's just quickly, what's your website, Neil?
Oh, it's easy. brainradar.com. Okay. And you don't even have to worry about how you spell Neil. Just go to brainradar.com.
Okay, wonderful. We're going to put your links for your books onto our website as well, and your link to your site and any other stuff that we've mentioned tonight. Fascinating interview. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure, and I'd love to come back another time.
Oh, you're coming back on. Don't worry. Thank you. Well, we've come to an end on tonight's show. Don't forget that you can listen and watch all our past interviews on the More Show's official YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for all the latest updates on the shows and past shows and upcoming shows as well. And you can visit themoreshow.co.uk for more information. Do like us on Facebook for the latest updates. So until next time, be safe.
Visit themoreshow.co.uk/shop to purchase products and services from your favourite past guests. If you're new to this site, you can also catch up on the previous television and radio shows through YouTube and the More Show website.